Fleming in the Philippines here just to cause some excellent trouble. There's been, how could you possibly have missed it, another great kerfuffle surrounding JK Rowling. Now, I'll be honest with you, I don't like what she does. I don't like her work, I never liked her books, and I thought the films were bloody awful. But that's just an opinion. She definitely does have a way of appealing to children. I mean, I know, having watched my own children reading her books and then watching the movies, that, you know, she did connect with them, and that's a good thing, that's a great thing. And to an extent, to me, you know, within reason, any reading is good reading, so the fact that these kids were reading Harry Potter, you know, I certainly didn't mind. You know, there's so many references in Potter to classical mythology and to other forms that one always hopes that, and being classically educated, of course, one always hopes that the children involved will go, well, that's interesting, and go and research it, you know, a bit more thoroughly and find out what, you know, actually an obelisk really is, and things like that, you know. However, a number of months ago, JK Rowling got herself in hot water because she flew to the assistance of a radical feminist who'd had her, she wasn't fired, her name was Maya Forstater. She was not fired. Her contract came to an end, and the company she was working for simply decided not to renew it in the light of statements she was making in social media. Now, you know, we can have an argument about whether it's appropriate for companies to make judgments on their employees in terms of what they say in their private lives. I mean, that's a perfectly valid argument to have, and I am, on that level, I am very dubious about what that company did. But at the same time, we have to recognise that that's a fact of life at the moment. Then we're just going to have to accept that, you know, if what you say on social media might well cost you your job. Simple as that. I mean, you know, there's lots of things she could have said. It wasn't just because she happened to be making some extremely transphobic statements that Forstater's contract was not renewed. Anyway, Rowling decided that she would pitch in on that one, and that got her a fair bit of stash. Now, it happens that last week, apparently, she wrote a long essay, 3,500 words or something, which I've read some of, not all of. I will get it done over the weekend. Extolling her view, an impossible view to hold, by the way, that the concept of woman is something that only applies to females. That's essentially what she's saying. What she's saying is that trans women are not women. Trans women cannot be women because they're not female. But the issue there, which the other side of this argument would take, and I would largely agree with, although not entirely, the problem with that one is that gender is something you perform, and absolutely, most natal women perform femininity, unless they're, you know, certain classes of feminists who don't want to perform femininity for various reasons, or basically lesbians and trans men. Most females perform femininity. That's fine. But there isn't anything in the rule book that says that people who are not female can't perform femininity. That just isn't there. That's something that's only happened in very recent years. I'll give you a couple of examples. For a very good example, every single one of Shakespeare's great heroines, and that includes Lady Macbeth and Juliet and all of the rest, they were all written to be played by boys, by young men, well, adolescent boys. They weren't written to be played by women at all, because women weren't allowed to play on the stage in that era. So these expressions of femininity, and they are very strong, I mean, Shakespeare did write a hell of a good woman, were actually played by men, you know, or males, not men, but males. They were adolescent boys between the age of 12 and 18, usually. So, and this is something you find across the planet. You find this in kabuki theatre in Japan. You find this across China, in Chinese theatre. You find this in India. You find it across the planet. That feminine roles are often played by males. Now, you may agree with that, or you may not agree with that. You may think, oh, how awful. But the fact is, it's true, it does exist. And so, whether or not you like them doing it, males can indeed perform femininity. And the simple fact is that if we look at the kind of trans women that, I tend to be interested in here, people like Sam, they're absolutely beautiful women. They are male. We're not arguing with that. They are definitely male, but they are also women. Their performance of womanhood is as good as any other woman's. Now, of course, in Southeast Asia, you still have the older, and in my view, much more important validation of womanhood, which is motherhood. But in the West, motherhood is something that is now rejected by, just a minute, excuse me, Pete, just lie down, eh? Motherhood is something that is just rejected by feminists. They don't want women to be mothers. And if when there was I can't remember her name, a feminist the other day was quoted as saying, the thing that makes a woman is motherhood, and all the feminists are jumping up and down saying, oh, how dare you say that, blah, 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 blah. And what they've got is this really essentialist idea, which is that born with a vagina makes you a woman. Well, no, born with a vagina makes you female. In most cases, not in all cases even. People with complete androgen insensitivity syndrome will be born with a vagina, but they're still male. Still got them XY chromosomes. So the first problem that I see with the position that these I think rather ignorant people who are entering this debate is that they're not seeing very clearly what's going on. And then I read on these parts, and I have not read the whole thing. I have read some of it. I read on in Rowling's essay in which she says that she had read the works, without quoting any names, of people who were more expert than she said, in the matter of transsexualism, transgenderism. And then he goes on to talk about Lisa Littman, who was the lead researcher in the Littman 2018 paper, which discussed, or in fact defined, rapid onset gender dysphoria. Rapid onset gender dysphoria is something that occurs mainly in adolescent girls, and in my opinion isn't actually a form of gender dysphoria at all. It's yet another disorder of adolescent girls, caused by the expectations that society has of adolescent girls, and by basically stopping them being mothers. Simple as that. Anyway, the next problem that Rowling has, and it's interesting because she really illustrates, it sounds like I'm picking on Rowling, but actually she's illustrative. She represents a really wide misunderstanding, and she sort of clumps everything together and says, well, this is all transgender, and that's just complete nonsense. It's complete nonsense. The fact is that there are two completely different forms of male gender dysphoria. Blanchard defined them: homosexual and non-homosexual. Homosexual is caused by sexual inversion. Now, Blanchard didn't say that, but that's reading the science and the history is the only intelligent conclusion you can come to. I mean, Blanchard says this is caused by something innate and doesn't say what it is. Havelock Ellis, 60, 70 years before him, said, well, it's innate and it's called sexual inversion. It's just political correctness. They don't want to upset the gays. Non-homosexual gender dysphoria, and I quote, all non-homosexual gender dysphorias in males are caused by autogynephilia. But it's a totally different thing. It's completely not the same. Why is it not the same? Because the latter group are non-homosexual. They remain attracted to women. Now, what does that mean? The first thing that you should be aware of is that the first group, HSTS, the sexual inverts, do not represent a threat to women at all, because they're not interested sexually in women. They're only interested sexually in men and in being penetrated by men. They are definitely not interested in fooling around with women in the toilets. It's a ludicrous insult to suggest that they would be. On the other hand, the argument is that autogynephiles, because they are heterosexual at root, become a threat. But I spent, okay, it was a couple of years ago, but I spent quite a long time trying to find the actual number of assaults that had been carried out by known trans women on real women and identify which type they were. I couldn't find a single one by an HSTS. Although I found many occasions where HSTS had been assaulted by women. Excuse me, dog, could you lie still? Those few, and it was very small, I mean, it was under 25 that I found, and I did spend quite a long time doing it, and I'm a good researcher. Publicly known cases wherein an AGP had actually carried out an assault on a woman in a woman's space. It was very, very rare. What's actually happening is that, this is being used as a fear factor. It's Project Fear for transphobes, basically. And what they're not understanding is that when she's in role as a woman, for most AGPs, she wants to be a woman. But most of them will try to conform to the social expectations of the identity that they are actually performing. Right? You see where this performance bit is being important here. They're performing women. That's what they're doing. And they're not doing it in exactly the same way as a woman, as a female does it, or a male sexual invert would do it, in which they would go, well, what the hell else am I supposed to perform? This is just me. For the autogynephile, it's actually constructed. She does it by observing women and assessing what she thinks they do that makes them feminine, and then performing that. She's an actress. She's doing exactly what those boys in Shakespearean theatre were doing. She's performing the role of a woman. Does the role of a woman include going into women's toilets and raping other women? No, it bloody doesn't. Yes, I know, I understand that there is a risk. But the fact is, this is minimal. There are actually very few cases. I mean, as I say, I did that research 2 or 3 years ago. The last year I was still in France. I'm quite sure people will unearth quite a few more by now. But remember, we're talking about a global population of 8 billion people, and the global population of autogynephilic trans women, I don't know, 50 million. And if you're talking about incidents in, dubious incidents involving them that are in the, less than 100, double figures. It's Project Fear. Make those people, demonize these people, and then we can other them. And once we can other them, we can get rid of them, because we can get people sympathetic to our point of view that they're somehow a threat. And that is unfortunately what the transphobic radical feminists are doing. I suspect, because everybody who knows her says she's a very nice person, I suspect that Rowling just hasn't the wit to understand what's going on here. Doesn't understand that she's being manipulated by some extremely dubious people. Doesn't understand that feminism is not about equality. It's about man-hatred. Well, it certainly is in the current world. And this is the coalface. This is where the two things are up against each other, because feminists want to present women as an oppressed class, which they're not in the West anyway. Trans women definitely are an oppressed class, but women are determined to hold on to those territorial rights that they think belong to them because they're female. And they fail to understand that this is a grey area. That in a social situation, it's not what you have physically between your legs that counts, it's what you're performing that counts. Because our relationships in society are all about performance, right? So, I kind of sympathise with JK Rowling, and she's making the kind of errors that somebody who's just glanced into this field would make. I mean, someone like Kelly J. Keen Minchell used to call herself Posey Parker. I mean, she's a despicable human being. She knows exactly what she's doing. She knows that she's operating Project Fear. She knows that she's acting mischievously, and actually worse. She knows what she's doing. I'm not convinced that JK Rowling really understands what she's doing. I think that she's been taken in by all these very worthy words about, you know, adult human female, and she doesn't understand that in the context of society, in the social context, that's not what matters. What matters is what you're performing. A picture up of Buck Angel. Now, Buck Angel, you probably know him, is a very well-known trans man, and I have never met him, but I have talked to people who know him, and they say, yeah, he's a real cool guy, you know, he likes motorcycles, go for a beer, you know, he smokes cigars, he's just a great guy, you know, not a problem. And these are talking about men here. These men have no difficulty relating to Buck as a man, even though Buck still has a functioning vagina. And I think I might stop here and go into another video and discuss the way that we could look at what the radical feminists, really they're TERFs. I mean, they are actually trans exclusionary radical feminists, and their defining characteristic is they're trans exclusionarists. The trans exclusionarists, right? That's defining them. So, although a lot of them complain about me calling them TERFs, and I don't do it that much, that's actually what they are. That's become their defining characteristic. You know, women have everything they want. They've already got equality. They've already got overrepresentation in education. They've already got overrepresentation in academia. They've almost got overrepresentation in the boardrooms. They've got everything they asked for. So what they want to do now is to shift the focus to a specific attack on the XY chromosome. And that's what they're doing. And they see trans women. And they don't care. TERFs don't care whether you're HSDS or AGP. All they care about is the fact that you've got XY chromosomes. And that's enough for them to hate you. That's enough for them to want you to not exist. And that's what they're doing. And I think JK Rowling is most unwise. I mean, you know, really seriously, to take the line that she has, because she obviously hasn't researched it thoroughly enough to understand the nuances and differences that do exist. To understand, to start with, that sexual inverts, male sexual inverts, are absolutely no threat whatsoever to women. None. Because they're not interested sexually in women. And she not even really understood that because they're actually performing femininity, AGPs tend to be highly protective of women. It's the inverse of what you'd think. And they're not donning dresses in order to run into public toilets, which, by the way, are public spaces which have been assigned to women. Since we want to talk about assignments and stuff, they're not women's spaces. They're not running into these spaces in order to feel up women and look at them and have, you know, and rape them or anything else like that. They're actually more likely to be defensive of these spaces on behalf of women, because for them, that's part of performing womanhood. You follow me that? It's quite interesting. It's quite interesting when you start to break it down. Anyway, I'm going to stop there. Enough of that one. Thank you very much indeed for your time and your trouble.